Who has the better villains, Batman or Spider-Man? These two always come up in conversations when people discuss rogues galleries. These iconic heroes just have the best collection of adversaries, better than Superman, Iron Man, Wonder Woman, any of the X-Men. Although, if there is a third place trophy, it goes to the Flash, but that is a topic for a different video. The Caped Crusader or the Webhead? Whose villains are the most interesting, iconic, memorable, and just plain cool? For this video, I'll be matching up 9 of each hero's most prolific villains, comparing them based on their similarities, and picking a winner each time. Whichever has the most victories by the end will be crowned the winner. If you don't like my matchups or think I should have included different villains, let me know down in those comments. I cannot wait for you to yell at me that I should have included Morbius vs. Man-Bat, or that I'm a moron because I didn't think KiteMan was better than Big Wheel. Now, let's get into it. Bane vs. Venom. I picked these two because they were introduced during a similar time, the late 80s and early 90s, when comics were starting to get edgier and grittier. These two villains are often ranked as the most dangerous of each hero's respective cast of villains, and they both kind of wear black luchador masks with exposed mouths. Kinda. Shut up. Both Venom and Bane offer a unique physical challenge to their heroes. Venom has copied all of Spider-Man's abilities along with the symbiote's natural powers, creating tendrils and granting Eddie Brock a powerful healing factor. Not to mention that he negates Spider-Man's Spidey sense. Peter can't use it in their fights, so Venom could attack out of nowhere and he's particularly vulnerable. Meanwhile, Bane is one of the very small handful of villains who can match Batman's intellect, deducing his identity and crafting a plan to wear him out before ambushing him in his own Batcave during the Nightfall storyline. And if his intelligence wasn't enough, he has the Venom drug. Check out that parallel. The Venom formula is essentially a super steroid that buffs Bane's already peak human physical stats into the superhuman range, allowing him to effortlessly defeat Batman and iconically snap the Bat's back over his knee. I'm not sure which scene is more memorable, Bruce's back snapping over Bane's knee, or Peter tearing the symbiote off of his chest. Of the two villains, Bane had the bigger impact, completely retiring Batman, so Azrael had to take over as he recovered. But Venom had much more of a lasting story and impact on the world. After the Nightfall story, Bane never really did anything else of note. He's only been adapted somewhat accurately once in The Dark Knight Rises, and even then he was a red herring for the true villain. He was nothing special in the DC animated universe, and my favorite appearance of his is in the movie Justice League Doom, where he enacts the plan to steal Batman's contingencies and use them against the League. But this is an adaptation of the Tower of Babel comic, where Ra's al Ghul was the mastermind. And then Hush ended up being a more personal version of the villain who discovered Bruce's identity. Bane just doesn't have any great stories outside of his introduction, but Venom has been adapted countless times. Obviously some are hit or miss, but between the 90s animated series, Spectacular Spider-Man, the Tom Hardy films, or even the PS5 game, there has to be at least one really good adaptation out there for anybody's preference. Plus, he became his own character in the comics after Peter beat him. Eddie had the whole Lethal Protector run, we got spin-off characters like Carnage, Flash Thompson's Agent Venom, as well as Null and the whole lore about the symbiotes. There is no shortage of great stories out there about Venom, or that wouldn't exist without Venom. This is 1 point for Spider-Man. The Lizard versus Two-Face. This might seem like an odd matchup. The obvious one would be Lizard versus Killer Croc, right? Well, Croc is not a particularly important Batman villain, and their similarities are pretty surface level. They're both scaly dudes that eat people sometimes. That's it. Meanwhile, Dr. Connors and Harvey Dent actually have quite a bit in common. They're both good people who are close associates of their heroes. Connors was Peter's teacher and mentor. If you don't know, they took his role as a character and gave it to Doc Ock in the Raimi film and in the PS4 game. And Harvey Dent is the Gotham District Attorney, a personal friend of Bruce Wayne and a close partner to Batman, especially in the Long Halloween story. Both characters were afflicted by some disability before they were transformed. Connors is missing an arm, and Dent struggled with dissociative identity disorder, multiple personalities in his head. After Connors experimented on himself and Harvey was burned by the acid, they developed alternate villain personalities that the hero had to deal with while reconciling that their friend may be gone for good. The Lizard and Two-Face. Finally, both characters were inspired by Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Right out the gate, I think Two-Face has the cooler shtick. His design is iconic, and even though it clearly has its roots in the campy comics of the 1940s, it has been adapted in so many great ways since then that I think it's been cemented as timeless. And the use of the coin to make all of his decisions is so fun. It opens up so many cool and psychological stories, having your villain be devoted to the concept of pure chance. I really do like the Lizard's design though. A giant dinosaur man in a lab coat is the perfect amount of asymmetrical. It really makes you do a double take, symbolizing the duality of his nature without being as on the nose as Two-Face. In terms of their stories, I think Lizard ones are more likely to get me emotionally. He's a poor man who's fighting against his monstrous nature. Seeing him reconcile with Spider-Man while he tries to bring himself back from the brink always pulls on the heartstrings. And of course, he offers the far superior physical challenge to his hero. Two-Face, at the end of the day, is a gangster with a pistol. On a surface level, you could slot in the Penguin, and all of his confrontations with Batman play out basically the same. But the Lizard is always scaling buildings and tossing Spider-Man into oil tankers. That said, these characters are more than surface level, and Harvey just has more nuance and potential for interesting plots than Connors. The Lizard has basically one story that gets told over and over again. Doc Connors is free of the Lizard formula. He gets tempted, he uses it, he goes on a horrible rampage, eating a bunch of people. Peter chooses to spare him, he gets clean, rinse and repeat. Two-Face may be simpler, but that means he has more versatility. There are more stories you can tell with him. Year One, The Long Halloween, Dark Victory, or even the really cool Judge episode from the animated series. And to be frank, Two-Face just has better drip. That's a point for Batman. The Riddler versus Dr. Octopus. Edward Nygma or Otto Octavius. Honestly, I'm not sure which one has the dumber name. But even though their names are stupid, these villains are very smart, and that's what makes them so much fun. They both challenge their hero's genius in different ways. Peter is a super intelligent chemist and engineer who designed his own suit and web shooters, so hitting him up against an equally genius Doc Ock, who built his own mechanical arms, is a lot of fun. They're great foils for one another, and Doc Ock's stories can dive into the ethics and burden of having an incredible mind. Do you owe it to society to share your genius? How do you balance that with ego? What do you do when your creation is misused or you can't control it anymore? Combine that with the interpretations of the character that have a rogue AI controlling the arms that degrade Otto's control over himself. It's ripe for action, drama, and cool themes. As for the Riddler, he challenges Batman's genius not as an inventor or scientist, but as the world's greatest detective. What's so fun about the Riddler is that he's always the architect of his own demise on purpose. He just can't help it. His ego will not let him use his genius to commit crimes and get off scot-free. He has to raise a flag to make sure everyone knows exactly who did it and even lead a trail right to himself. Because, of course, he's so smart, it won't matter anyway, right? That's what makes him such a great foil to Batman. Bruce also needs people to know he's the one stopping crime in Gotham. That's why he uses bat-shaped boomerangs and wears an emblem on his chest. If he was just trying to scare people, the bat suit would look a lot more monstrous. But Batman isn't self-interested by advertising his identity. He does it to deter criminals and to give hope to civilians. But to someone like Nygma, he can't wrap his head around that. All he sees is someone who always solves his riddles and plasters his own logo up in the sky every night, and it drives him crazy. Honestly, I think the Riddler is a better foil to Batman than Doc Ock is to Spider-Man. But unfortunately, there just aren't that many great Riddler stories. There's Zero Year and Dark Knight, Dark City, but he's just not as prolific. He wasn't very influential in the animated series. He's always delegated to side quests in the Arkham games. I did like the new twist on him in Pattinson's The Batman, but on the other hand, when I think of Doc Ock, I am immediately remembering Alfred Molina in Spider-Man 2, the PS4 game, his role as the master planner in the legendary Final Chapter comic, and of course, who could forget the superior Spider-Man run? I just like Doc Ock more. Point for Spider-Man. Before we get to the next matchup, I wanted to take a quick second to ask, why not give this video a like and subscribe? I'm putting out videos on a schedule again, and I have a bunch of cool theories, versus battles, and what-ifs planned. It's totally free, and you can always unsubscribe later if you change your mind. Please? No? Well, what if I told you I know where you live? Just kidding. But seriously, subscribe. The Penguin versus Kingpin. When I was writing this video, I was going to put the Penguin up against Vulture because they're both bird-themed, right? But this is a way better comparison. Both Oswald Cobblepot and Wilson Fisk are prolific businessmen by day and supervillains by night. They skirt around the reach of the law over and over again, and it's not uncommon for the hero to visit them for a talk and then just leave, because there's nothing to arrest them with at that point in time. That's what's so fun about these guys. They operate just about as above board as a villain can, and a lot of their crimes are simple. Racketeering, drug trade, general black market activity, all that. Penguin has the Iceberg Lounge, a hotspot for criminals and crime bosses to gather and talk, and definitely a way to launder money 6 ways to Sunday, but he presents it as a legitimate business. When Batman shows up there, usually the Penguin tries to have his security escort him out, but Bruce Wayne could spend all night there and no one would bat an eye. It allows us to see more stories where Bruce uses his public persona to solve crimes and gather information. Or maybe one of his other secret identities, like Matches Malone. Kingpin is a lot less of a public figure, unless he's running for mayor, that is. He's a more typical representation of white-collar crime. The business he does is more vague and far-reaching, and his wealth is far greater. He's honestly a better analog to Lex Luthor, but one of the things that makes Fisk such a good villain is his single human element. He is a monster of a man with inhuman strength and zero remorse or respect for humanity, with the sole exception of his wife, Vanessa. Combine that with how he frequently uses legal loopholes and underhanded tactics to stay out of jail, that's why he's a cool inversion of Spider-Man. Peter generally cares for and respects everyone, but after Kingpin ordered a hit and nearly took out Aunt May, Kingpin is his one exception. Someone Peter will straight up end if he has to. Kingpin only cares about the life of Vanessa, while Peter cares about the life of everyone but Kingpin. And yet, he's also the one villain that has the easiest time staying out of prison. That makes him a great thorn in Peter's side. I think between these two, I definitely prefer Kingpin. Seeing him use his 300 pounds of muscle to smack around Spidey is always more entertaining than Penguin's little robot birds or gun umbrella. And Cobblepot never had as big of an impact on Batman as Fisk did on Spider-Man. Another point for Spider-Man. Scarecrow versus Mysterio. Oh yeah, this is a fun matchup. Both villains wear a mask to evoke an otherworldly, supernatural persona and attack their heroes with mind-bending illusions. But they're different enough that they both have a really cool angle to tackle. Let's start with Mysterio. Quentin Beck is a failed actor and special effects aficionado. He decided to use his knowledge of illusions to perform robberies. As time passed and real-life special effects technology has improved, Mysterio evolved from using literal smoke and mirrors to drones, holograms, and robots, as well as hypnotism, sleight of hand, and hallucinogenic gases. He usually makes his crimes look like something out of another world, magic or aliens or demons, when really it's just Beck and a crew of henchmen beneath the facade. He's even used robots disguised as the X-Men to attack Spider-Man, catching him off guard and confusing him, as supposed heroes started trying to tear him apart. And of course, Mysterio's most notable recent appearance was in Far From Home, where he used his deception to create media spin, turning the world against Peter Parker. It's a fun gimmick. You always know that fighting Mysterio means going up against a mountain of lies, but not knowing which of your senses to trust or how many layers of deception there are, it makes his stories dramatic and super entertaining. Scarecrow is cool for an entirely different reason. You almost always know when he uses his fear toxin, which infects the mind and causes a person to hallucinate their greatest fears. The drama doesn't come from if Scarecrow is tricking you, but what exactly you see when his toxin affects you. It gives us a sneak peek into the psyche of any character who falls into his clutches. What is Commissioner Gordon's greatest fear? How about Dick Grayson? And will they be able to overcome that fear? Or are they reduced to a blubbering mess while the Scarecrow, Jonathan Crane, moves on on to inflict more terror. That's what's unique about him too. He's a villain entirely motivated by malice. He doesn't want to steal money or gain power just to inflict fear onto people. He was bullied as a child and became fascinated with the emotion of fear, and now he loves lording that power over innocent people. Just like how the Riddler plays off Batman's role as a detective, Scarecrow is a riff on how he inflicts fear onto criminals. It's a trait they share. They want to be scary. And of course, Batman is at his core a scared child, so battling a villain who can make him relive his last night with his parents in Crime Alley, it makes him extremely formidable. When Batman faces the Scarecrow, he's forced to reconcile with his own deepest trauma and reconsider the methods he uses to fight crime. And that's why I like him more than Mysterio. Scarecrow may have a simpler gimmick with less range, but he shows us so many different sides of his hero. Mysterio just doesn't do that with Spider-Man. This point goes to Batman. Black Cat versus Catwoman. I mean, come on, this is one of the most blatant comparisons out there. Selina Kyle and Felicia Hardy are both cat-themed femme fatale thieves in skin-tight black leather. They've both been villains and anti-heroes, and both shared on and off again romances with their respective heroes. It's really tough to pick out differences, but they do exist. For one, Felicia actually has superpowers. She has the psionic ability to affect probability fields. Essentially, she psychically causes bad luck for anyone trying to cause her harm, because black cats cause bad luck, right? It's not as potent as other luck-based characters like Domino, but it does allow her to tussle with Spider-Man and many of his rogues. Another difference is their motives. Felicia is a thief because she finds it fun. It's a bad habit she inherited from her father. But Selina became a thief in most continuities because she was poor and owed someone money. Her thefts often tend to have an altruistic streak too. Catwoman has a habit of taking in strays, whether they be actual cats or young women in trouble. She collects them, sort of like Batman collects Robins. And even when Catwoman's crimes are entirely self-interested, they usually involve stealing from someone she deems immoral. Black Cat is different. Stealing is a hobby for her. She has no problem yoinking artifacts from a museum, for example. When it comes to how they interact with their heroes, Felicia is usually like a whirlwind in Peter's life. She shows up, they have a lot of fun together, he tries to get her to go straight, and she ends up escaping, probably without learning her lesson. Meanwhile, Selina is Bruce's most consistent love interest. She's a much lighter, morally gray, and often helps out the Bat family in stopping greater criminals and protecting Gotham. Catwoman's got bad habits, and she likes to keep secrets, but she wants to do good, and Bruce recognizes this. Black Cat is just here to have a good time, and sometimes that means helping people if she gets to hang out with Peter in the process. Because of how much she's in Bruce's life compared to Felicia, I have to give this one to Selina Kyle. Catwoman is more morally interesting and has a bigger impact on her hero. Another point for Batman. Clayface versus Sandman. Clayface is actually more of a mantle than a specific person. Usually the version you see in modern media is some conglomerate of the original Clayface, Basil Carlo, mixed with one of the following Clayfaces that actually had superpowers, Matthew Hagen or Preston Payne. Whichever version, usually Clayface is a B-list actor who was granted the ability to change the shape of his face and body, which he used to help him get more roles, playing all sorts of different looking characters. But when he eventually learned his abilities could be used for crime, he became a recurring villain for Batman to fight. I matched him up with Sandman because they're both shapeshifters whose true appearance is a mass of formless dirt. They can both grow to tremendous sizes, launch portions of their bodies, and change their limbs into all manner of different weapons. As for Sandman, his real name is Flint Marko. He's a criminal who only wants to help take care of his daughter, who has a chronic illness that is very expensive to maintain. Marko constantly finds himself in an instance where he has to commit crime, even though it's not really the type of life he wants to lead. Meanwhile, Clayface is usually reduced to the final boss of henchmen, hired by a more conniving supervillain. He sometimes has an ego and wants to be adored as an acclaimed actor, but it's just not much of a contest. Sorry this one is so short, but it's an easy choice because there's not a very definitive take on Clayface, and he's rarely the villain in a great Batman story. Meanwhile, Sandman was the best part of Spider-Man 3, awesome spectacle and an emotional side mission in the Spider-Man 2 game, and he's got some great stories across various comics and cartoons. Spider-Man takes this one. Ra's al Ghul versus Morlun. Now we're getting back into some interesting comparisons. I picked these two because they both enter their original stories specifically seeking out the hero. Morlun is hunting spider totems throughout the multiverse, while Ra's al Ghul broke into the Batcave to ask Batman to replace him as the next Ra's, to take his place as head of the demon, leader of the League of Assassins. Both of these villains are extremely old, nigh immortal, and have knowledge of mystic arts just beyond the realm of the natural. They make the heroes feel very vulnerable. Ra's deduced Bruce's secret identity, entered the Batcave, and kidnapped Robin, all with very little effort. And Morlun showed up to punch Spider-Man harder than any other person he's ever fought, then taunted him by explaining he could track his location anywhere in the multiverse, now that they've touched. Oddly enough, both of their debut stories involved the hero being poisoned. Batman was lethally stung by a scorpion during his duel with Ra's in the desert, while Peter willingly dosed himself with radiation to infect Morlun as he tried to feed off of his life force. They're both fundamentally immortal due to external processes. Morlun was resurrected through a cloning ritual on Earth 802, while Ra's is resurrected and kept eternally youthful by bathing in a Lazarus pit, a mysterious pool of energy that returns the dead to life. They both even have an ecological theme. Morlun is from a race known as the Inheritors. His genetics are made from the DNA of every genus on Earth, and he absorbs the power born from totems, the beings who live at the bisection of man and beast. And Ra's al Ghul is an anti-human eco-terrorist who is hell-bent on reducing the Earth's population to preserve its wildlife. Frankly, it's kind of crazy how much these two have in common. Secret societies are always sick, especially those with vague mystical properties and a legion of ninjas. So when you give all that to an immortal who's absolutely dripped out, Ra's is so cool. I also really like that he likes Bruce so much. It's not often a villain expressly recognizes the strengths of their hero. Normally the "we're not so different, you and I" comes at the end of a story, and it's so painfully cliche. The fact that it's the first thing Ra's does is really intriguing and instantly makes you curious about his character and motivations. And I'd be lying if I said I don't want to see the alternate universe where Bruce takes over the League of Assassins and shapes it to his will. That's why it's such a tempting offer. It would be awesome for us as the audience to see, but it's also so maddeningly appealing to Batman. With the League, he could theoretically spread the idea of Batman to every city on Earth. He might be able to wipe out crime entirely, but to do so, he'd have to sanction their ways, sanction their brutality. And it's something he just can't accept. On the flip side, I really like what Morlun represents, a sort of super predator designed to prey on the evolved form of every creature on Earth. It's a cool concept. The mystery of his origin was appealing, and even now I'd like to know more about the Inheritors, but that's it. He just doesn't have the depth or motivations of Ra's, nor does he offer a thought-provoking dilemma to Spider-Man. He's just a multiverse Kraven the Hunter. Ra's is so much cooler. Batman wins this one. The Joker versus Green Goblin. And now we've reached the final comparison, the greatest foe for each of our heroes. Green and purple, cackling maniacs who terrorize their home turf, have taken the lives of Bruce and Peter's loved ones and stand at the pinnacle of each prospective rogues gallery. When these villains were introduced, unlike all the other villains these heroes fought, their secret identities weren't revealed. The Joker wasn't given a backstory until late into his publication history, and even then he was given several, the whole multiple choice thing. Although the Red Hood story in Ace Chemical Factory is the most commonly accepted origin for the character. Meanwhile, the Green Goblin was this mysterious force that showed up to terrorize New York only to disappear soon after. His secret identity something relatively revolutionary for a comic book villain. Of course, it was later revealed that he was business mogul and father of Peter's friend Harry, Norman Osborn. Due to popularity and dichotomy with their heroes, these two villains ended up becoming arch nemeses. movies. Green Goblin would clash with Spider-Man dozens of times, the alternate persona of Osborn eating away at his psyche, giving him a personal and biting vendetta against not only Spider-Man, but Peter Parker as well. It culminated in probably the greatest tragedy of Peter's adult life, the fall of Gwen Stacy. This was such a culmination of the evil that the character represented. It was also the story where the Goblin himself perished. Although his mantle was picked up by Harry not long after. The Joker, of course, has many stories terrorizing Batman and his loved ones. The Killing Joke is one of the best examples, where he traumatized Commissioner Gordon and even paralyzed Barbara. But nothing beats what he did to Jason Todd, prematurely ending the second Robin's life. Batman and his relationship with his sons were never the same after this. Joker left a lasting mark on Bruce's psyche. Of course, these are comic book superheroes, so both Gwen Stacy and Jason Todd eventually came back, albeit under very different circumstances. Their stories were forever shaped by these villains, and it shows in their choices and development. Also, an interesting observation, Green Goblin rides around on a bat-shaped power glider and originally had no powers, just a series of gadgets alongside peak human athleticism. He's sort of a twisted take on Batman. And the Joker is a character always quipping and laughing, finding ways to poke fun in the most horrible situations, just like Spider-Man does when he's fighting crime. I find it fascinating that Batman and Spider-Man's greatest enemies are essentially twisted inversions of one another. It's kind of fun. Anyway, I think what I like most about the Joker is that he is the complete diametric opposite to Batman. Chaos versus order, murder versus protection, comedy versus angst. The Joker is obviously obsessed with Batman because he's the ultimate challenge, the most serious man in the world. For a self-obsessed egomaniac like Joker, whose entire life revolves around finding humor in everything, of course he commits himself to making Batman crack, make him laugh, make him break, make him stop caring. If the Joker can show the ultimate depravity, the cruelest joke to Batman, maybe that will finally snap his iron will, and he'll fall into the nihilistic cesspool Joker bathes in every day. Because he's specifically interested in breaking the hero, Joker's stories are always about his relationship with Batman. They always showcase Batman's greatest strengths. With the Green Goblin, he's just sadistic. He's also an egomaniac, but it's not that he has anything specific to prove in his battles against Spider-Man, at least not usually. He just believes that publicly defeating Spider-Man will gain him recognition that he can translate into forming a worldwide crime syndicate. The Raimi movies seem to portray him as a might makes right kind of villain who wanted Spider-Man to lord his power over others in the same way he did. But if I'm honest, the Willem Dafoe version of the character is probably my favorite. He was easily the best part of No Way Home. His cackling mania and pure distilled malice was just so entertaining. He only had about 30 minutes of screen time, but he easily cemented himself as this Spider-Man's arch enemy and nearly drove Peter to murder. I do really like how personal Green Goblin's beef feels with Spider-Man. It's not really about proving anything specific. These two dudes just absolutely hate each other and go feral whenever they see one another. I could probably talk about Joker and Green Goblin long enough to make an entirely separate video, but if you've been keeping track, Batman and Spider-Man are perfectly tied with 4 villains each. So I need to pick a winner here and quick. When it comes to iconography, there is no beating Joker. He's way more popular, he's had far more iconic stories, he just owns the zeitgeist. There's a reason he ends up appearing in literally every single Batman property. Oh, the Batman movie has the Riddler as the villain? Surprise! Joker cameo. Joker can't show up in Arkham Knight because he's dead? Nope, he's inside Batman's mind. Even his tertiary characters are everywhere. Harley Quinn is one of the most popular comic characters of the last decade. You don't ever see anyone talking about Hobgoblin. But I think the Joker's incredible popularity is actually a bit of a detriment. He is oversaturated for sure. I don't want to see him in every Batman story. It was annoying when he showed up to replace Black Mask in Arkham Origins. As much as I love the Joker movie, I don't think it needs a sequel. And like I said, it was an absolute delight to see Green Goblin pop up and steal the show in a movie where he wasn't expected. That said, it doesn't matter enough. The Joker is just too iconic, too interesting, too good of an opposite for Batman. If Spider-Man and Green Goblin feel like two men who hate each other, Batman and Joker feel like two mythic forces clashing over fundamental ideological differences. For me, the latter is always more fascinating. And while Willem Dafoe is incredible, he just can't stack up against the combined talent and charisma of Jack Nicholson, Mark Hamill, Heath Ledger, and Joaquin Phoenix. It's just too much. The Joker wins, meaning between Batman and Spider-Man, Batman has the better villains. Stay frosty.